I'm Elijah Armstrong. I am a junior at Penn State University. In 2015, I went to Stanton College Preparatory School in Jacksonville, Florida. It's a highly ranked IB high school. It ranks top 10 in Newsweek for national high schools, and it has every year since roughly 1990. Also, relevant piece of information, I am a photosensitive epileptic. I have seizures that are caused in part by flashing lights, and I've had these seizures most of my life. My junior year of high school, I had an AP calculus class, and this class was in a room with a very low ceiling and lights that would flash in part because the building was built in like 1860, so what can you expect? But the lights would flash, and it was a high school block schedule, so I was taking this class every other day, and it would cause me to have seizures. I would go to class, I'd have a seizure, have to go home, go to the hospital, and then deal with the same thing 2 days later. So 2 weeks into the school year, I realized this wasn't going to work. So I talked to my guidance counselor, and I asked if I could have the light bulbs changed in the room, or if the class could be held in a different classroom, or if I could take the class online. Literally any option that would prevent me from having to physically deal with the flashing lights. And I was told by my guidance counselor that Stanton didn't do accommodations, and that if I needed an accommodation, I would have to leave for the integrity of the program. So I was taken aback, and I reached out to the assistant principals and the principal, all the way up to the superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, who all told me that Stanton does not do accommodations, and that for the integrity of the program, I would have to leave the school. And that's when I started advocating as a student, and I did the only thing I could do is I told my own story to everyone that would listen, and to a lot of people that wouldn't. And I ended up getting my own story put into the Florida Times-Union, in part because the school administrators were so adamant in the idea of not doing accommodations that they frequently put in writing that for the sake of the school and the integrity of the program, I would have to leave because of my disability. And when my article first hit Florida Times-Union, the reactions fell into one of two camps. The first camp told me that Stanton doesn't accommodate, and that if I needed an accommodation, I would have to adjust or move on. And the second camp was many, many students and parents who I hadn't talked to before, who came to me and told me that they experienced similar issues, not just at Stanton, but at other high schools in Duval County. And they didn't speak out about it because they were afraid of facing intense backlash. So this led me to realize how important it is to educate people on educational issues and rights in education. And that led me to found my website, Equal Opportunities for Students. Equal Opportunities for Students is a blog that does text posts and video interviews. And what we do is we have two purposes. One is to educate people on educational laws and educational rights, and teach people about educational resources. So options that you might not have known you had beforehand, and laws you might not have known were in place before. Because I experienced many, many people who didn't know that disability discrimination was covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the individual, IDEA, that didn't know that these laws were in place. And the second is to allow students and parents to tell their story in education, to verbalize when they have experienced discrimination, and not just so that they can hopefully reach people who can help them, but also to show principals and teachers and college presidents that these issues do still happen on our campuses, and not just issues of disability discrimination, racial discrimination, sexual assault, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, discrimination based on sexual orientation. These things do happen, and it's important to shed a light on it. And I've been advocating as a student, been participating in student advocacy for about 5 years now, and here are some of the biggest lessons I've learned. One of the most key values that I learned was best articulated by my friend Maddie, who started a program at Penn State called Schreier for Women. It's a support group for women in Penn State's Honors College. And in my interview with Maddie, I asked her, what advice would you give to another student who is trying to start a similar club at their school? And she told me, find your tribe. And it's incredibly important to find people that agree with you, that agree with your premise, and want to work towards improving it. Because if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And the sound of many voices calling out for change is much more powerful than one voice calling out for change. And you'd be surprised how much farther you can go when you're not the one shouldering all the burden yourself. Now, in the fall of 2017, some white supremacist groups on Penn State's campus started leaving out propaganda. And this, coupled with Richard Spencer requesting a space to speak on our campus, led my friends Tessa, Ray, Sam, and I to form the group No Hate Penn State. And we wanted students to have a peaceful way to resist the message of white supremacy while still creatively and proactively celebrating the diversity and unity that makes a place like a college campus great. And our vision was to have a concert, but not just any concert, a concert where we have many different kinds of performers. And we have visual art pieces displayed, and we have a co-created art piece where all the attendees can come and work together to create a monument of the unity and diversity that our campus stands for. We actually, for Martin Luther King Day 2018, just had our first event. And through planning that, one of the things I learned is that everyone has skills that are useful for outreach. I do stand-up comedy at Penn State. Didn't seem like it would be useful, but I have a friend that I met through stand-up comedy. His name is Joe, very talented comedian who just ended up finishing a tour of Pennsylvania. When I told him about the concert we were doing, he told me he would be more than happy to be one of the performers at it. Through doing stand-up, I also met a very excellent painter, Anna, who was gracious enough to allow us to use some of her paintings to set up the atmosphere we were trying to for this concert. We met my friend Sam, who was planning it with us in No Hate Penn State, is a keyboard player for a local band, Doppler Poppins. And through his connections in the music scene of State College, we were able to get well-respected local musicians Rashmit Arora and Eric Ian Farmer to also play at this concert and donate their time. We used our connections to contact local groups like Eco Action and Students for a Better Politics and the Center for Women's Rights, and we held a diversity expo where students could come and learn about civic organizations in their area so that they could make sure that they were helping to better the State College community outside of just attending this one event. We enlisted the help of a filmmaker, Olivia, who's very, very talented, and helped us document the event so we would have evidence of what we created together and show other people that weren't able to make it to the event. And one of the best connections we made was with a woman, Elaine, who owns a local coffee shop and cafe called Webster's. And she was gracious enough to allow us to use her space at Webster's for 3 hours on Martin Luther King Day, absolutely free. And thanks to all of the effort and energy and time that everyone put into this event, we were able to have 250 people come through our event in the 3 hours that we held this on Martin Luther King Day. And another thing I learned through planning this is that plans change. They're not permanent. Our initial plan was to have our Martin Luther King Day concert outside. Shortly afterwards, we realized that Martin Luther King Day is in January, and we are in central Pennsylvania. That is not going to work, but plans aren't permanent. They're changeable and they're malleable. Just make sure you're working at it. A lot of people are afraid to get into advocacy because they don't know where to start and they don't think they have the skills that are necessary. But you really just have to jump in feet first. I mean, through doing equal opportunities for students, I learned how to conduct interviews. I learned how to record and edit videos. I learned how to run a website, and about 2 years later, we have more than 90 videos up. If you just dive in, the skills will come. Now, I don't want to make this sound like it's easy, because it's not. It's a very, very difficult process. There's a lot of time and energy involved, and you will reach out to a lot of people who will disagree with your message entirely, and you will run into a lot of bureaucratic roadblocks, but it is necessary to push through it because the end result is worth it. And I like to remind people that the race towards justice isn't a sprint. It isn't even a marathon. I consider it a relay race. like when you think about it, Brown didn't fight the Topeka Board of Education for himself. He did it so that his daughter could go to a school that wasn't separate but equal. You have to make sure that you're pushing the bar as forward as you can for the next generation. So I like to think that I do the work that I do so that another epileptic student that's still in high school can take AP Calculus without having to go to the hospital every other day. And honestly, every time I start an event, I learn one new thing I did that worked and about 3 that didn't. But I can say that every event I've done and continue to do improves on the last one, and that's truly the key here. And there really is an incredible power in student advocacy, and the more people take it up, we can make sure that we leave our schools, our campuses, and our cities better than we found them before. Thank you.